Okay.
Yeah. So, okay. So, I was born in 1947 to Clarence, and Lita Lambrecht, very German name, who both previously were married, and they had 3 children between them. I have 2 brothers, both named Jim, both same last initial, which was fun, and a sister named Joan, who was 18 when I was born. My mom's family of 4 children, she was the baby, immigrated from Czechoslovakia when she was a year old in 1911. Growing up, her mother never learned to speak English. It was a foreign-speaking household. They spoke German and probably some Czech. But because she had learned to speak English so well as all of her sisters and her brother without an accent, and that was a big deal, to be an American with no accent. So her strict attention to prompt enunciation with absolutely no accent, as with her siblings, would be a gift to me from God, as I would struggle growing up with a pronounced speech deficit. My dad grew up in a family of 8. He was a fraternal twin and was next to last in birth order in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So he and his twin were very nearly the babies of the family. He was the picture of God's love in his graciousness, his affection, his forgiveness, his protection, and his provision over me and his 2 children, always. An absolutely adorable man, but still a man's man. By my dad's very nature, was a protector, provider, and when at age 4, this was demonstrated as my parents and I visited a very elderly couple that they had known in Chicago. By this time, we were living in California. And the wife was dying. She was in bed. She had Parkinson's, and her husband, of course, very elderly, visited with us. And when my dad wasn't looking, he put his hand on my leg and slid his hand up my leg. And then that stopped. We walked to the car to leave, and I told my daddy what this man did. My father, without drama, without any fanfare, quietly tucked my mother and I in the car and said, "I'll be back in a minute."
How old were you?
4. He walked into the house, he walked out of the house, got into the car and said, "We will never see them again." And I knew that my dad protected me. Another illustration was my dad would always read me the funny papers on Sundays in particular, because they were in color, and I would sit on his knee and I made pin curls in his hair with bobby pins and clippies, and then atop his enormous head I would set a doll bonnet, and the doll bonnet had long ribbons that hung down and little flowers at the top, and there he sat, totally oblivious to everything I'd just done to him, and just loved me and read me the funny papers. And then a particular time there was a businessman at the front door who had an appointment with my dad for insurance matters, and my dad goes to the front door and lets the salesman in, and this salesman tried to keep a straight face throughout this meeting, and he points out, he said, "You realize you have to go." And my nonplus, my dad just whips it off, takes the pin curls out, he's like, runs the fingers. And I could do anything. I could do no wrong. I was absolutely adored by this man. So I was born with a cleft palate,
which was surgically corrected, but resulted in seasonal hearing loss and speech deficit, which would be a part of my childhood and my life for decades. In first grade, I was selected to be a part of a private speech and lip reading tutoring program that I was in for 5 years. At 5 years, I could read lips across a large, crowded room with 100% accuracy. So health concerns were always taken seriously by both of my parents, and any illness was promptly seen by a doctor. Not to miss, we were Lutherans. Lutherans, big time. I have a little pin here that proudly was displayed on my shirt on Sunday with the first year pin, which meant that I did all of my lessons and turned them in. Didn't matter if I understood them, okay? But I did them, and then the second year is surrounded by a gold wreath. It's very impressive, you know. And the third year, followed by 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th year bars, which finally took me to
Can you read the title? I can't read it.
to Lutherans Catechism with an explanation by Joseph Stump, printed in 1915, but this, of course, was issued to me in 1959. So every Saturday, I went to catechism class where finally in 1961, and all my little notes are in here, it's very impressive, 1961, I was confirmed. Yes, our church had stained glass windows and proper benches with kneeling benches, and there was a rail up in front which you would go and take your communion with little wafers and real wine and all of the things. And every season, all of the colors on the altar and around the priest's neck, pastor's neck would be changed, and it was all very ceremonial and quite impressive. So that, never once in my experience do I recall any discussions of Scripture or the Lord, of the Lord, or at home, ever. Many will say, we were good Lutherans. We were. It was assumed all was well. And so we get to remember, many will say, Lord, Lord, and he will say, I never knew you. So I can say both my parents were eventually granted my wishes. Also I just wanted to share, my dad taught Sunday school. My mother put together the church bulletin. They were both in the choir, and we had our act together. So my parents always eventually granted my requests. I don't remember one request that I ever went without, and I never had to share anything. No wonder I thought I was rich. In fact, we were middle class, but I thought I was a princess. I took everything for granted because I'd always been provided for, protected, and loved. I had no idea other kids didn't live like I did. None. I would hear much later in life how some of my girlfriends had suffered in their childhoods by their own family members. So in my teens, my dad bought me a car when I was 16. It was British Racing Green Carmen Ghia. My friends thought it was a Porsche, and I let them think that. Princess. I was so secure in my dad's love, I would argue with him, but I wasn't rebellious socially, really valuing the security that I was living in. And I knew when I was 10 that I was blessed. And I didn't really understand what that meant, but I knew that I was blessed by God. I didn't like my mom much. She wasn't overly affectionate. She was a very practical, stoic European mother. Her love language was displayed in all the detailed things she did for me. And I didn't appreciate her at the time.
She would carefully heat my favorite soups in a thermos for my lunchbox, shopping for my favorite treats. She got me a doll when I was 11 who could walk, talk, and sing in different languages. Her name was Winnie.
Wow.
She sewed bejeweled butterflies on a skirt for me and embroidered my name in cursive on all my gym clothes. I was so weird. Did your mom do that? If she did, you had to know that you were loved. Well, I certainly know she loved me now, because love demonstrates itself. When I was 18, 19 years old, I met a young man about my age. I thought of him as a friend. We went out for about a year. He thought we were more than friends. And he decided that he could rape me on a date. I never saw him again, and I never told my parents. And I felt guilty, as many victims of rape can attest. This violation flipped a switch in me, and I became sexually active. The dawn of worldliness and a downward spiral had begun. In my 20s, at 21, I began managing a restaurant in Newport Beach, where I met my future husband, very handsome, blonde, tap hunter looking, green beret, became pregnant, and we got married. He was active military, and I moved to Miami, Panama, and Colorado in that order, where we divorced. I remember saying out loud to myself, I can be both mother and father to my little girl. I was clueless. I got my stylist license in Colorado, working there until my daughter was 4, when I moved back to California. I became licensed again in California, opened a salon with 3 partners. On the surface, I looked like I had my life together, getting established in California, but social life, finances, and my morals were very shaky. I was working with very worldly people who spent a lot of money, people with loose morals who drank a lot, sometimes did drugs, and socialized with homosexuals and gay people in the industry. I became more and more bankrupt in every way. Took out a consolidation loan from my very sweet aunt, paying faithfully every month per the note signed by both of us. This note would take a number of years for me to pay off. A few months later, in 1980, I started listening to the 700 Club in the morning when I was getting my daughter ready for school. Hearing all these wonderful testimonies and his answers to prayer and miracles. And this was very different Christianity than I grew up with. 7 months later, paying on my loan, alone in my apartment. I'm so glad I wrote this down. On April 28th, 1980, I got on my knees on my staircase and I asked Jesus to save me. On the 3rd day, my aunt drove from Sun City, being a ceramics teacher, and gifted me with this box. In the box were 3 ceramic mugs. Each ceramic mug had raised letters saying the same thing. Love, love, love. Laying across the mugs, the 3 mugs, was the original note of our signed agreement. Written in red, it said paid in full. I was 32 years old. I don't think the powerful influence of this timing, the message of love on the mugs, and her paid in full on the 3rd day struck me immediately. No one knew that I had prayed my prayer to Jesus. I started paying attention to the quality of how I'm living my life, but changing slowly, finding and going to Calvary Chapel.
And Kent and I met about this time that I was saved. We knew one another for 4 years, and we married when my daughter was 13. The first year was an absolute mess and nightmare, although we were going to Calvary Chapel. But slowly our married life became stable. In 1990, 5 years later, our son was born. And we felt we wanted a charismatic church and began going to the Vineyard. Actually, that was before our son was born. When our son was 2 years old, there was disaster in my family everywhere. In 3 months' time, my dad sustained a terrible brain injury, needing ongoing care for the rest of his life. My daughter, who had moved, started using and became homeless. My mother developed Alzheimer's, needing ongoing care for the rest of her life. And my husband began using again and continued to use for over 14 years, as he has shared openly at church while leading worship. It's another miracle. I needed psychiatric help, counseling, went to Al-Anon, prayed for miracles, had suicidal ideations, and went to church. God continues to change everyone in our family today. I think we're a miracle. My daughter is married to a godly man who loves the Lord, who leads worship. My son is married to a godly, just amazing woman. I have 5 grandchildren, the youngest of which is 2, the oldest of which is 30.
Mhm.
My husband has served in our church leading worship. My daughter is and has taught at Camp Pendleton for over 13 years. I'm so proud of the way he's called to serve. When I asked for and he baptized me in his Holy Spirit, I am blessed to have witnessed miracles. At 76, he continues to give me hope. I can still be used by him. I can still hear from him. And there are ministries he is equipping me to participate in. I still amazes me at his allowance to me of more and more hope in him and what he wants to do. Now, after 44 years of his sweet, patient, ongoing work, I can see an amazing pattern of hopefulness and, of course, his love, until I get to go home, because I know I am, in fact, his princess.
Yes.
Amen.
So, over 30 years ago, I wrote a song, standing at my kitchen counter. I wrote it in 20 minutes.
Wow.
And it is my hope that it might be used in a program that may be developing. And it goes along the lines of my experience in the Lord. So I'm not a singer. I'm not a singer. So this would be sung by my granddaughter or perhaps Tia. I sang it to her and she cried. So, called A Knight in Shining Armor. Just another timeless ballad of unrequited love. She could be Miss or Mrs. and she's been dreaming of a charming prince to rescue her, to ride upon his steed, carry her to Camelot and meet her every need. But fantasy and fairy tales are not the need of life. Reality is sometimes pain and often filled with strife. So sinned against and striking out, she hardened fast her heart, forsaking hope and promises, desperate place to start. She needs a knight in shining armor, a damsel in distress. She sees a peril around her with its pain and consequence. No help from the men she's known, nor establishment of state, left only with her broken dreams, the lies she thought were fate. She cries out in desperation, she cries out with a broken heart. bankrupt life. She steals her anger, her outrage, her curses, and her strife. Then a gentleman with tender eyes waits, standing at her door. It's difficult to trust him, since she never has before. So patiently he stands and knocks, bids her let him in, promises he knows her heart and all that he can mend. Could this be the night she's heard of? Could this be the man to fix her life? Could this be the one she's heard of? Could this be the man she's heard of? Jesus Christ? Well, she took a risk. She let him in, and her life has been transformed. He calls her precious, his beloved, and one clear as the sun. He touches her and heals her wounds, and he'll never let her down. He set out precious jewels upon a ring that is her crown, a golden crown and a robe of glory are what Jesus has in mind for a captive free from a life of bondage. Jesus demonstrates his love for womankind. Jesus demonstrates his love, Holy Spirit from above. Jesus demonstrates his love for all mankind. Jesus demonstrates his love, Holy Spirit from above. Jesus demonstrates his love to all mankind.
Beautiful, thank you.
Nice.
Wow.
You are a singer.